I know, right? Alright, this is the only other chapter I'm going to read today. So how long is it? Way too long. Okay, we're good. 18. I don't know what would have happened if Jan Johan hadn't told on us. What did happen was that the police turned up at the sawmill before we had any chance to get Pierre Anton out there. We were still there when they came. All of us. What they later wrote to our parents was that besides 20 seemingly unmoved 7th graders, they had found a foul-smelling heap of strange and macabre content. Including the severed head of a dog, a child's coffin, possibly with contents, so as to not interfere with evidence. The coffin hadn't yet been opened. A bloody index finger, a desecrated Jesus statue, the Dannebrog, a snake preserved in formaldehyde, a prayer mat, a pair of crutches, a neon yellow bike, etc. It was the etc. we found insulting. Like they could reduce the meaning to etc. Etc. and so on. And more of the same that needn't be mentioned by name. At least not at the present moment. We were given no chance to object. What a commotion there was. This heap right here holds so much meaning. That's the funniest shit, dude. Thank you for that meme. Like, literally, they, like, slap the heap. They're, like, so much meaning, you guys. We were given no chance to object. What a commotion there was. No one saw any reason to take into consideration that the fact, oh God. No one saw any reason to take into consideration the fact that it was only 8 days before Christmas. Most of us were grounded. Some were given a sound beating. And Hussein was again sent to the hospital, where Jan Johan had also been admitted. They were the lucky ones. They got to share a room and talk. The only thing I could do was lie in bed and stare at the wall and the striped wallpaper, right from when the police took me home and gave the letter to my mother on Saturday afternoon. Until I was allowed to go to school on Monday, with orders to come straight home. And that was only the start. At school, we got hauled over again. We were hard and unyielding. Or rather, almost unyielding. A few started crying and saying that they were sorry. Henrik Butterup started sobbing and said it was all the rest of us who were to blame and that he had never wanted to be a part of any of it, especially not the business about the snake and formaldehyde. Forgive me, Holy Carl wailed. So we all began to feel bad. So much that Otto eventually had to pinch him on the thigh. "I'm sorry, I'll never do it again," whimpered Frederick, and held his back so straight in his chair that it looked like he was standing at attention. At least until Macon thrust the sharp end of a pair of compasses into his side. Sophie looked scornfully from one renegade to the next. She herself was completely calm. As when Eskildsen, after having bawled us out for 38 minutes solid, hammered his fist into his desk and demanded to know the meaning of it all, it was she who replied. "Meaning," she nodded, as if to herself. "None of you have taught us any. So now we've found it ourselves." Sophie was sent up to the principal straight away. Rumor has it that she simply repeated the same words to the principal, even if he did give her a detention and bawl her out so it could be heard all the way down to the schoolyard. When Sophie came back to class again, there was a strange light in her eyes. I studied her for a long time. Apart from the slight blush at the top of her cheeks by the edge of her hairline, her face was pale and unflinching, maybe with a touch of coldness, but also with a touch of fire for something. Without knowing exactly what, I knew that the fire was something that I had to do with, without knowing exactly what, I knew that the fire was something that had to do with the meaning. I decided I wasn't going to forget it, no matter what happened. No matter that the fire wasn't something that could be added to the heap, or that I was ever going to be able to explain in any way to Pierre Anton. At recess, we stamped around, discussing what we were going to do. It was cold. Our hats and gloves were no use after only a short while. And the tarmac in the schoolyard was covered by a thin layer of slush that made our boots wet and unpleasant on our feet. But we had no choice. Part of our punishment was that we were no longer allowed to spend recess indoors. Some thought we should tell the whole story and make it clear that it was all Pierre Anton's fault, and then return everything to where it came from. Then they might let me raise the flag again, Frederick said hopefully. And I could go to church, added Holy Carl. Maybe it would be the best thing to do. Sebastian looked like he was already looking forward to going fishing again. No! Exclaimed Annalie, surprising us once again. If we do that, then none of this has mattered one bit. And nothing's going to bring back Oscar Little, is it? And nothing's going to bring Oscar Little back, is it? Gerda added angrily. And she was right. Oscar Little had succumbed to the first night of frost on December 3rd. Oscar Little, no. Yeah, that's definitely the worst part of the book. I'm sad. Now I'm sad. Nothing's going to bring back Oscar Little. None of this will have meant anything. Poor Cinderella. Elise sighed at the thought of the dog having died in vain. I said nothing. It was midwinter, and there was no good to be had of green wedge sandals at this time of year. So far, most of us were sticking together. There was full support for Sophie when she spat on the ground in front of Holy Carl's blue boots. "Scaredy cats," she hissed. "Are you really going to give in that easily?" Frederick and Holy Carl scraped coyly at the tarmac with their heels. Sebastian shrank some. "It's just that we're in so much trouble. And we did do things we're not supposed to," Frederick ventured cautiously. "Isn't that the meaning we've got out there at the sawmill?" Sophie looked Frederick straight in the eye and stared until he lowered his gaze and nodded. "If we give up the meaning, all we have is squat. Squat, zilch, nothing. Are we agreed?" She looked around at the rest of us, more afire than ever before. "Isn't the meaning more important than anything else?" "Of course it is," Otto said, and took the opportunity of giving Frederick a hard shove. So hard it almost made him fall. The rest of us nodded and mumbled our agreement. Sure it was. Of course. It couldn't be any other way. For that was how it was. "There's only one problem left," Sophie continued. "How are we going to show Pierre Antoine the heap of meaning?" She didn't have to explain what she was thinking. The police had cordoned off She didn't have to explain what she was thinking. The police had cordoned off the sawmill and the heap of meaning to protect evidence. And we were all grounded. The bell sounded, and we were unable to discuss matters further until the next recess. Why are these kids not in jail? They're kids? It was Sophie herself who provided the solution to the first part of the problem. "With a bit of luck, we can get round the cordon," she said. "There's a skylight at the side of the building facing away from the school. or sorry, there's a skylight at the side of the building, facing away from the road and the entrance. The police aren't guarding there. If we can get a hold of a ladder, we can get in that way. Being grounded was trickier. Few of us felt inclined to challenge the wrath of our parents right now. Perhaps we could ask Pierre Anton to go out to the sawmill alone and see it for himself. Richard suggested. He'd never do it, Macon said. He'd think we were out to trick him. I had an idea. What if Tearing Tuesday ran a story about us in the heap? Then he'd be sure to get curious and go out there himself. Surprised they aren't already running a story, but how are we supposed to get them to run a How are we supposed to get them to run a story about us? Otto sneered. The police are keeping it all secret because of our names and our age. We call the paper ourselves and pretend we're outraged townfolk who've heard about the desecrated Jesus, etc. I chuckled at the thought. Just don't say etc. when you call them, Gerda shouted. No doubt thinking about Oscar Little, lying all stiff in his cage in the middle of the heap. I'm not going to make the call. Who else? We looked at one another. I've no idea why they all ended up looking at me. But I guess that's what comes of not keeping your mouth shut. Keeping your mouth shut. Keeping it locked. Don't say... I should have swallowed my tongue. That afternoon, I wasn't alone in the house for even a moment. The same again the following day. They said etc. because your crimes were unspeakable. That afternoon, I wasn't alone. Well, they did mention all the unspeakable crimes, except for the one that they probably wouldn't have understood. They were like, yeah, there was a finger, a severed head, a dead hamster. They're like, and then etc. Like some sandals or some shit. There was the national flag, a severed head, a finger, etc. Okay, anyways. Blah, blah, blah. That afternoon I wasn't alone. And again, and then the same again the following day. But the third day was perfect. She has a brother? My brother was at a soccer game, conveniently. Okay, my brother was at a soccer game, and my mom was going out to the store. No sooner had she cycled out of the driveway than I made straight for the telephone in the kitchen and pushed the number. Tearing Tuesday, said a sharp female voice. I'd like to speak to the editor, I said. Please. Mostly because I didn't know who else to ask for. I'd put a blouse over the receiver. It wasn't enough. "Who should I say is calling?" asked the female voice, a little too inquisitively. Hedda Huld Hansen. It was the only name I could think of in a hurry. Even if I did regret it right away, since this was supposed to be anonymous. Still, it wasn't my name, but the wife of the priest. So why should I care? At least now I was being put through to the editor. "Solberg speaking," he announced in a deep, resonant voice. The voice was a comfort. It sounded kind and gentle, like my granddaddy's. So I went whole hog. "Hedda Huld Hansen here. I'd like you to treat this in the utmost confidence. But I do believe it to be a matter." Okay, sorry, I'm reading this terribly. "Hedda Huld Hansen here. I'd like you to treat this in the utmost confidence. But I do believe it to be a matter Tearing Tuesday ought to take up." I drew my breath heavily, as if something was preying on my mind. "I'm sure you've heard about some of these dreadful going-ons at the church. First, there was the business of the vandalism at the churchyard, with 2 gravestones being stolen. And then there was our very own Jesus on the rosewood cross being taken from the church. And on a Sunday at that." Again, I took a sharp breath, making a hollow, rushing sound. "What I am certain you do not know, however, is that these national treasures have now been recovered, together with the coffin of a small child. What's more, with contents, who knows? And a snake in formaldehyde, and a neon yellow bicycle, and..." I lowered my voice. "A dog with its poor throat cut, and a dead hamster, a bloody index finger, and much more. Including a pair of green sandals. I couldn't help mentioning the sandals, even if it probably wasn't wise. Fortunately, the editor didn't seem to pay it any mind. "How very appalling. Indeed, shocking, don't you think? Out at the disused sawmill. And they're saying there's a group of children who have been collecting all these, what should we call them? Objects. With the idea of finding meaning. Indeed, there's supposed to be some kind of heap of meaning out there." Again, I drew my breath sharply between my teeth, almost whistling. Supposed to be some kind of heap of meaning out there. The editor repeated his view that this was certainly an appalling matter. But unfortunately, he had no one to put on the story at the moment. What with Christmas coming up. Before concluding the conversation, however, He made sure that the disused sawmill, Hedda Huld Hansen was referring to was the one on Terring Markve, on the outskirts of town. I think he believed it was all just made up. A made-up tale. But still I hoped it had made him curious enough to put a journalist on it. To be on the safe side, I called Sophie. It was perhaps a good idea to keep a lookout for anyone coming by the sawmill. There was the Christmas party at school, which we were excluded from attending. Then came the day before Christmas Eve, my birthday. And now our parents' hearts finally started to thaw. Then it was Christmas Eve itself. And happily, we were able to ascertain that we got just as many gifts as our more well-behaved brothers and sisters. No, it's not Agnes's birthday. And then it was Christmas Eve itself, and happily we were able to ascertain that we got just as many gifts as our more well-behaved brothers and sisters, and just as many as we had gotten in previous years. But true Christmas arrived only on the day before New Year's Eve, when Terring Tuesday ran a story about demons having found their way to Terring. The demons were us. Page 3 carried an exhaustive description of the heap of meaning. Because our names weren't allowed to be made public, we weren't mentioned specifically. It just said that one of the senior classes at Terring Middle School was suspected of being involved. We were more than a little proud of ourselves. Even if Pierre Anton still hadn't shown up at the sawmill. When school started again on January 4th, we paraded around the schoolyard, pulling ourselves up to full height and looking all superior, so that the other 7th graders and the junior classes, too, could be left in no doubt that we knew something they didn't. Several tried pumping us, but the only thing we were willing to reveal was that we had found meaning. We had found the meaning. It was Sophie who instructed us. We could mention the meaning and nothing else. So that was what we did. We found the meaning. And that was what we told the teachers and the parents and the police and everyone else who kept on asking why. And it was what we told the big press when they showed up. The end of chapter 18. We found the meaning.